I seem to have an E2 Wind Chimes in my account for some reason. As a self-proclaimed tryhard, the reason is obviously for gameplay purposes, by which I mean because she is incredibly hot. I wanted to zoom in on something here to emphasize how horny Wind Chimes makes me. What don't I want to zoom in on? Nonetheless, I'm sure there are other reasons to build Wind Chimes, besides her banging body. It's the English voice, isn't it?
Let's rest and regroup. We can take back what we lost later.
Alright, enough of that. So, is she better than Quartz? For the most part, they have the same kit. Attack up skill 1, attack 2 targets at once, and a stat buff talent. Wind Chimes has a Vigor attached to her talent, but functionally it won't matter much. If you're using Wind Chimes for damage, you probably aren't using her to tank something with her health too. Just how this stuff works out. Since her stats are higher than Quartz, she is better at being a stat stick, but being slightly better than a bad 4-star isn't particularly impressive for a 5-star. The main difference is in her skill 2, which does something completely different. Let's go over it. On paper it sounds like a very overloaded skill. It gives shelter, it stuns enemies, it does a bunch of damage, but in practice it's hard to get value out of all of the skill's effects at the same time. The least impressive part is the shelter in my opinion. 40% shelter is a pretty good defensive resource, but it only lasts for 5 seconds on a skill with 25 SP cost. I think that's the single worst skill uptime in the game, at least for a defensive skill. It's down 5 times longer than it's up, so it's not something you can cycle effectively with a medic, though it can be used to tank a single big hit effectively. The stun itself is excellent, mainly because you can deactivate the skill manually, making it really easy to use it to interrupt enemy attacks. There is a bit of a conflict between the shelter and the stun. You want to use the full duration of the shelter, but you also want to use the stun fast so you can get it on cooldown again. Given that the stun mitigates 100% of the damage, instead of 40%, it should take precedence against any enemy that isn't stun immune. In terms of damage, skill 2 does a bit more than 6000 damage. Before I start criticizing it, I want to note that it has a unique use that very few skills can do. There are certain enemies that have a conditional shield that gives them incredibly high defense, at around 3000. Wind Chimes can just ignore that and just kill them straight up, because the skill does so much damage. So what's my problem with the skill? The SP cost. 6000 damage sounds like a lot, but it becomes a lot less impressive when it only happens once every 30 seconds. And then you remember her skill 1 puts her at over 3300 attack. The damage would only be exceptionally useful if you have a large swarm of enemies clumped together, and only if they come in long intervals of at least 20-ish seconds or so. That's not something that really occurs all that often. The effective damage of her skill 2 is also lower than it seems, because she stops attacking while charging the attack. Since her attack is around 1800 off skill, that is a pretty big loss of damage. It's still worth charging it over manually deactivating it earlier, but it just barely makes up for the lost attack that you miss while charging it. To be clear, you only miss one attack while charging it. If you use an attack, then cast the skill and then attack again, that's a 5-second window. Crushers attack so slowly that you will only miss one attack in that 5-second window. So, overall the skill has various effects, but it's hard to get value out of all of them at the same time. If you're stalling a boss with her and using the stun, you obviously don't care about the damage too much. If you're one-shotting trash with damage, you don't care about the stun, and so on. Overall, skill 2 has various functions that can be used in niche circumstances, while her skill 1 is the better DPS skill. This is exactly how Quartz works too. However, Wind Chimes is a 5-star guard, so other than costing way more to build, we also need to compare her to other 5-star guards, some of which are actually good operators. Slightly better than one of the worst 4-stars just doesn't cut it. Being a crusher, she still melts from 3 trash mobs, and the shelter doesn't help much with that, since she still has 0 defense. I've heard the claim that crushers are good against arts damage, but I don't really agree with it. It's not like they have any res built into their kit. Well, Wind Chime does, but besides the point. So all you have is the high health that you can rely on. So as long as they don't get one-shot, any other operator can fight adds damage just as well. What they are good against is extremely high damage burst attack, like the Steam Knight, since they can avoid one-shots.